Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our nErDCampNJ session on dialogue. We are excited to be here. I want to introduce everybody to you so you know who is talking rather. I'm Denise Weintraut. I'm one of our nErDCampNJ organizers, and I'm an 8th grade teacher at the Berlin Community School. I teach 8th grade ELA, which is down in the South Jersey region. And I've been teaching for about 9 years, and I am a nerd who loves to read and loves books and is fangirling all of our authors. So I'm excited to be here. With me, I have Erica George, and Erica is a young adult fiction author and teacher, I believe, too, right, Erica?
Yes, I am.
And she deals with a lot of themes in her writing about environmental activism, which is a hot new trend on the literary scene. So I'm sure this is going to be very exciting for all of us. And her recent works that are coming out are Words Composed of Sea and Sky, which is from Running Press Kids with Hachette. That's coming out the spring of 2021, right, Erica?
Yes, next May.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then The Edge of Summer by Little Brown Books. And that's coming out summer of 2022.
Yes.
Woo! Things already in the works. That's great. And then we have Ariel Bernstein. Ariel, forgive me if I mispronounced your name.
Oh, it's like Ariel, like saying the letters R-E-L very quickly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So Ariel is the author of some fabulous books. I Have a Balloon, which received a starred review from the School Library Journal and Kirkus Reviews. Nice. And Where Is My Balloon, which was a Bank Street Best Book of the Year. And We Love Fishing. And she's also a New Jerseyite. And so we're pleased to have you here with us. And
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks.
Good. Finally, we have Katrina Moore. She writes and teaches in New Jersey as well. And her debut picture book is One Hug, which was illustrated by Julia Wolf. And it's a celebration of the different ways that hugs bring people together, which we're all missing in this COVID pandemic era, for sure. And then she also has another book, her picture book, Grandpa Grumps, illustrated by Xindi Yan. It's a story about a little girl, Daisy, and how she connects with her Chinese grandfather across cultures and generations. And that's from Little Bee Books. I forgot to say that your One Hug is from HarperCollins as well. All right, did I miss anything about anybody?
No. We're good.
Okay, so we're here to talk about dialogue. And when we talk about dialogue, we're talking about conversations or what our characters are saying. And we wanted to talk today to both teachers and students and people in general about the ways that authors use dialogue and how we can incorporate it in our own writing in a way that's engaging for our readers and fun to do as well. So who would like to start us off?
I guess I could start. We talked about my picture books. I Have a Balloon and Where's My Balloon? And they're all dialogue. Of course, you don't need to have a story that's all dialogue to have it be an important part. But for picture books, I really love to write in all dialogue. I love using it to show characters' personality. I love showing the story arc. I love using dialogue to show humor. And when you write in all dialogue, for myself, other people can do it other ways, but I can show you how the text looks. It's like this. So very much like writing a play or a screenplay. It's pretty easy. You don't have to worry about dialogue tags or any of that stuff. And then when you have dialogue in a book, it can be shown some different ways in picture books. You might recognize these guys. A lot of times all dialogue is shown in these speech bubbles. For I Have a Balloon, it is shown just the text, and they're kind of close to the characters to give you the reader a visual cue of who is talking. And I can just show you one way that I use dialogue to show personality. You have Al's dialogue here. It is 6 words, just ends with a period, very calm. And then on the next page, you have Monkey's dialogue. A lot more text. There are exclamation marks. There are some sentences where all the letters are capitalized. It kind of shows the reader that Monkey is a lot more talkative, a lot more excitable, just, you know, kind of a maybe more energetic character. So just visually seeing the difference in dialogues between the two characters is a way to show their different personalities.
I love that. So Katrina, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I want to first say with Ariel's books, I love that they are all dialogue. And I love sharing them with my students also in that way, because not only is it really fun to read, but then for rereads, especially her books are one of the ones that I teach second grade right now. My second graders always grab them for rereads, and then they want to perform it for the class. And so I think that books that are in all dialogue lend really well to like readers' theaters performances and things like that, which are great for, you know, building that fluency and that prosody. And so I really love that. And then you can see this reader taking on the personality of the characters as well, because it's so well portrayed. So I think that's really brilliantly done. In Grandpa Grumps, the dialogue is really important because communication is one of the really big themes here. And so this is a book that's about connecting with someone when words kind of fail you. And so the dialogue here really shows their different personalities, Daisy's personality and Yaya, her grandpa's personality, and how they kind of are clashing with their words, but then they find other ways to connect. So I'll just share an example, one of my favorite spreads here. So Daisy only speaks English, and her grandpa is visiting from China for the week, and he only speaks Cantonese. And so she's trying to find different ways to connect with him. And so it says, on Monday, Daisy popped into Yaya's room. I made hot cocoa with extra marshmallows. And you can see she's very excited. She's got her exclamation marks. Gah, Yaya grumbled. On Tuesday, Daisy wanted Yaya to read to her. Yaya looked at her book. He looked at Daisy. Yaya grumbled. And so Yaya's always kind of like making grumbles and grunts because he's not really sure like what words he can say to Daisy that she'll understand. But then he tries here. I'll show it to you up here. And he says, do, D-U, which means read in Chinese, but she doesn't know that. And so she thinks he's saying do, D-O. And so she's wondering, what am I going to do with his newspaper? And then, so I start this scene with the dialogue, and then it finishes with the illustrations, and you can see that she does not interpret it correctly, and she ends up doing artwork all over his newspapers. And so in this book, I used dialogue specifically to kind of build that tension, and then later in the book, when they do finally find a way to connect that's not through words, then the dialogue shows that transformation also. When she starts to try to learn some Chinese words, and then he starts to learn some words in English, and it just shows that their connection has strengthened. And so I think that when you're thinking about like what you want the dialogue to do, if you think about you take a step back and you zoom back at your story in general and think, this is, what is this story really about? And then how can the dialogue, enhance that or make that stand out more?
Okay, that's excellent. So it changes a bit when we move from picture books to chapter books and to middle grades books and young adult fiction. So Erica, what do you do that might be a little different or build upon that with your young adult fiction and dialogue?
Yes, I'm going to apologize for the dog in advance because I cannot control the barking today. For me, when I'm talking about dialogue, when I'm teaching dialogue, I have 3 rules. That is, he has rules too. Hold on one second.
It's always fun when we are in this COVID era and we're trying to negotiate all these background noises. It should almost be its own dialogue box where somebody pops up in the background with their new dialogue. I'm sorry, Erica, continue.
No, I'm sorry. So I have 3 rules for dialogue when I'm writing it, when I'm teaching it to my 8th graders. And that is that dialogue needs to build on characterization. It needs to reveal information, and it needs to entertain the reader. And I think that that's probably the same for picture books and for young adult as well. I think maybe one of the things, what I really loved about Katrina's is that she was using words like how the grandfather was grumbling and things like that, where I think in middle grade and young adults, dialogue tags like that should probably be used more sparingly, just because we're trying to continue to move the story along, and we have probably more ground to cover with more pages, of course. So those words are saved for specific occasions.
So I really like that. You mentioned 3 dialogue rules. Could you just repeat those for us, Erica?
Yeah, definitely. It needs to be building characterization, revealing information, and entertaining the reader. It should be doing at least one of those things if it's there at all, and it should most of the time be doing all 3 of those things.
So let me get your opinion on this. We all start off with he said, she said, these dialogue tags that identify who is doing the speaking. What's your thought about that? And does it change as the books become more mature? Are we required to do he grumbled, like Grandpa grumbled? Are we, he expounded? Or what are we supposed to do with these dialogue tags? What's your opinion on this, guys?
I mean, I for my chapter book series where I use a lot of dialogue tags, I try to keep it pretty simple. It's told in present tense, so he says, she says, asks, replies. I don't want to if there's a whole conversation with a ton of dialogue, keep saying says. But, keep it simple, keep it consistent. I think as Erica says, you're focusing more on what they're saying than how they're saying it. And you don't always have to use the dialogue tag to show how they're saying it. You might want to show it more in the actual dialogue. I think it is like Katrina's book, having that grumbles there is really great and appropriate because you are using a lot less words to show what's going on. And so I think for picture books, you do get more room to have more description in the dialogue tags. But I think once you start on the chapter book level and up, and of course there are always exceptions, but I think it helps a lot just to kind of keep it simple and consistent.
Mm-hmm. That was something that I had to learn as I started to expand into writing other genres. And so I have a chapter book series that's not yet announced, but hopefully soon. And one of the notes that my editor gave me on my draft that was acquired while I was revising it was always use dialogue tags, because I had some instances where there was a lot of like back and forth dialogue. And just like Ariel said, I didn't want to like clog that up by saying, she says, he says, she says, she says, and so I just removed it thinking like, this is pretty obvious who is saying what. But I think it's really important to keep the audience in mind too. So for the chapter book, specifically, these are readers who are coming to books independently for the first time, and they're starting to understand it without the help of the teacher or a parent right there. And so in that case, it's important to put it there. And so one way that I figured out to switch it up, instead of having that he says, she says, he says, she says, was to put some action in between. And so maybe there's a little bit of dialogue, and then instead maybe the character's doing something, she runs across the room. So instead of saying Daisy interrupted, Daisy runs across the room, don't do that, so it's keeping with the scene and it's moving it forward, but you're breaking it up with a little bit of action so that it's not just dialogue heavy, and with all those dialogue tags specifically for like the chapter book early reader age.
So I really like that. So just to iterate that again, by putting in some action, we can break up that endless stream of dialogue tags of he said, she said, And I know a lot of us also play with the order of where we're putting things rather than say ending the sentence with he said, she said, or he says, or she says. You know, we started off, she thought about it for a minute. What do you mean that was difficult? You know, and that way you're still identifying who's doing it without a he said, she said. With that sound right? She sells seashells by the seashore. But it helps break it up a little bit. What other tricks do you guys have for breaking up that endless stream of dialogue tags?
At least when I'm doing YA, I think that there's more flexibility because we have independent readers at this point reading these novels. And so I try to also consider the voice of the character, so that I know if I have a character, I have this one in my debut, I have a character, she's a little more shy, a little more reserved, and she's talking with a boy who's a little more outgoing. He's very sure of himself. So he's going to say things, he's going to say and act a certain way that she is not. So it's kind of clear to the reader, like, okay, this is obviously her talking because she's being quiet. She's not really sure what to say. And this is obviously him talking because he is very sure of himself and he is going to put himself out there.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about discussing was how students can work with dialogue in their own writing to help develop those distinct and original characters. Do you have some advice you could offer them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one really fun activity is to kind of either think of a new situation, you know, maybe one of the characters, it could be really simple. They forgot their lunch at home and the other character has a really mouth-watering lunch back in the days where you could share lunches. Or you could take the scene of a book maybe that a teacher has just read to a class. Maybe they just read, you know, a Gerald and Piggy book, Can I Play Too, where there's a third character who comes and wants to play. And say, okay, you've got your two characters. What are they going to do in this situation? If it's a book that they've already read, like Can I Play Too, say, how are your characters going to react differently? What are they going to say that shows how they're going to take in that situation and try to resolve it? And, you know, and expect that could go very differently from the book you've just read, or again, make up a whole new situation and just let their imaginations run wild about what they would say in that instance. And that, I think, could be a pretty fun thing for kids to figure out.
So taking existing characters that students know,
yep,
and building in new scenarios and situations, yep, that with maybe an additional character that's an unknown and those existing characters.
Or I would just take a book, a scenario that they've read, and take those characters out of it and add the characters that they're creating, the brand new, original, unique characters, and say, what are your characters going to do? And, you know, if they're going to do the exact same scenario, then maybe you want to make a new one. But I think it can be fun for them to think, you know, well, what distinguishes my characters, and what would make them react differently in this situation? Why would they say things differently? Would they jump right into a situation? Would they be more reserved? You know, they really have to think about their personality and how they would react to things.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I like that too, because I feel like that could provide some really nice scaffolding as well. You know, putting them in a situation or giving them a situation first that's really unintimidating. This is a book you've already read. This is a scene you already know. And then let's, you know, first think about how these characters reacted, and then now how would you put your character into it? And so it's just a nice like segue for them. So I think that's very clever. I like to do two things when I'm getting to know my characters. And then once I get to know my characters, I feel that I can write dialogue for them much more naturally. And so the first thing that I like to do is I just like to make like a character map for myself. And so I'll put the character's name at the top of a blank page or in the middle. And then I'll just write things, you know, and I won't censor myself, but I'll just write things that I know about the character or that I want the character to be. So for instance, when I was doing this with Daisy, you know, I knew I wanted Grandpa to be really grumpy and I wanted them to contrast each other. And so I was thinking, like, who would contrast Grandpa the most? It's like, well, like the happiest go lucky girl, right? So I knew I wanted her to be really sweet. I knew I wanted her to be a little bit aloof and like not realize what's going on around her, so that when Grandpa's grumbling, she's not really understanding why he's grumbling. And then I wanted her to really like fluffy, fun, frilly accessories, because I thought that would be really fun for her to like dress grandpa up. And then it says a lot about him too, that he even lets her dress him up, right? Like maybe he's grumbling, but he's allowing her to participate. Or he's still participating. And so once I just put some things down, you know, what's her age? Okay, she's about 6 years old. So I make this map, I get a few things down, and then I like to interview my character. And that I find really helps me get into their mind and see like, okay, how would she say this? So I might just ask her a bunch of random questions. And these are not necessarily things that are going to go into my story, but they're things that help me get to know her, so that when I start to write the dialogue for her in my story, I'm already in her voice. I'm familiar with it. And so I might ask her, what's your favorite ice cream? You know, what do you like to do when you first wake up in the morning? What's in your backpack when you go to school? And then I might ask, the same question, you know, another character, I might ask the same questions or some different questions. But then when I get stuck or I write something and I think, that really doesn't sound like Daisy, I have something to go back to and to check. So it just provides a nice reference point for me to continue to go back to as I'm writing, to make sure that it's consistent with how I want that character to be.
I love that. So you start with a character map,
Mm-hmm.
and you just write yours down. I know some students like to collect images off of the internet of, you know, character looks or
Yes.
even outfits that might work for them, especially with young adult lit. The personality becomes shown through their styling many times.
And I draw them sometimes too, and I'm not an
Mhm.
illustrator, but it just kind of helps me picture like, what do I see this character as?
Excellent. And I love that you do the interview. I'd not heard that before. So that's really exciting to me personally. Erica, what do you do?
What I was actually going to comment is that we are all saying, as I was thinking in my head as you guys were saying it, pre-writing is such an important part of the writing process for professional writers and for students as well. So I think that we can't just jump in with dialogue. And I think a lot of times students want to do that because it's the most fun. You know, it reveals the character. It lets us kind of play around with what's going on. But you can't really do that until you figure out A, what your story is about, and B, in line with that, what does your character want? You know, so I think that goal, motivation, and conflict, especially with your main character, is really, really imperative. So figuring that out first, and I often will use goal, motivation, and conflict charts, where we might talk about like an external motivation of your character, which could be something like slaying a dragon, you know, like I need to save the town from the dragon, that's external. But internal, that's something that they deal with on the inside. So maybe they don't believe that they're capable of leading people, you know, and they're kind of nervous about that, and they're actually very afraid of dragons. And that's something that they need to work on as they move forward. So dialogue is always going to be tied into every other aspect of the story. And pre-writing helps us figure that out.
I love this.
Say, because I have to admit, I love jumping in and figuring out the characters in the story. I'm kind of a pantser. I would just say if that's what kind of excites a student to begin writing, to kind of jump in, just to be aware that there probably is going to be revision and going back and making sure that everything is consistent. To do a lot of the pre-writing, it definitely gives you more of a roadmap. You know, figuring out, doing the interview, it's just a great thing. Sometimes even if you jump in and you start, you could get stuck and maybe you need to go back a little and do some of those pre-writing exercises. But if that is what excites a student to get writing, to jump in and do it, I would say that's fine. Just be aware that, you know, you really want to look at what you've written and go back and make sure that it's consistent throughout and that you're happy with what it is showing the reader.
Excellent. So one of the, we're coming close to the end of our session, and I know that there was one question we still wanted to address, which was, how can parents and teachers use dialogue in their books or use the dialogue in books to get kids excited about reading and writing? And so what are some of the ways that parents and teachers can do that?
I can start with that one. I think something that, like when I'm reading with my own children at home, 3 and 5, so, 6 now actually, 3 and 6, they love to read with me. And so they, you know, they're more right now. My 6-year-old is starting to read now, but my 3-year-old is really just memorizing. But he absolutely loves when we can find a book and then he can join in. And so I think making shared reading experiences, or as, you know, that just really is fun for them. So something that you can do together. One of our favorite books to read aloud is Please, Mr. Panda. And then also No, David, because the text is light and he feels like he can participate. And so he likes to be the one to be the mom and say, no, David, no. And so I think just finding books in general that are, especially at home, I want to say. And then in my classroom, I like my students' independent reading to be ones that they're really engaged with as well. But I think finding really engaging books that the whole family, or at least the reader you're trying to hook, enjoys is really key. And then finding ways to make that as enjoyable as possible. Like I know for one of my 2nd grade students, the whole family loves Harry Potter. And, you know, it's not one that the 2nd graders could read independently on their own, but the parents read it to them. And so they tell, you know, they've been keeping me updated on, they're twins, and they keep me updated on, you know, what chapter they're on, because it's really exciting. And so I think it helps as well for them to, you know, just to have that shared experience.
Great. Ariel, do you want to add in?
Oh yeah, I actually recently had a thing where the illustrator for Where's My Balloon, Scott McCune, he has a program on YouTube, Scott McCune Storytime, where he invites the authors of his books to come and read their book. And so I did the audio for Where's My Balloon with my 8-year-old, and I let him choose the character. He wanted to be Monkey, and I was Al. And I think it definitely added a whole lot of fun for us and for the listeners to hear the 2 different voices acted out. As Katrina is saying, it's having it be a shared experience is so meaningful for everyone involved. I think books that are all dialogue, either picture books or in early readers for a child who's really being an emerging reader, there are a lot that give a lot of visual cues about how you could be reading it. For example, you know, the big letters, maybe say it a little louder. It could be fun. Someone told me once that they read it with their kid and they pretended to do Al in a British accent, which I was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. It's kind of, you know, however you want to read it, just encourage a kid to have fun with it. I think it is definitely something that can get them excited.
Cool. Erica, what about you?
I think that with like middle grade and YA, what characters are saying really says a lot about them, whether or not what they're saying is true to their character and they're trying to hide something, or whether they're being as honest as possible. And I think that can be really, really purposeful for students to figure out, like, what does this dialogue mean? What does it tell me about this character? What does it tell me about the story? And I think that's why dialogue is probably our favorite part. Like Ariel was saying, that's her favorite part. She wants to jump right in, and I don't blame her. It's mine too. And I think that we should be using that to engage students. You know, if that's what's fun about writing, if that's what's fun about reading, then yeah.
Excellent. And I think we alluded to this earlier, but we said, you know, readers' theater is a great way, especially for older kids who are able to read independently, to have a shared experience with a story. And I think that is something that we can even do in this COVID era where we're on Zoom or what have you, where kids are taking turns with readers' theater and adding the voices and the persona and the pauses before they're speaking to make those characters come to life. And I think even just Erica alluded to this, is this something that the character would say? What's the hidden meaning behind this? Are they being truthful? You know, is this dialogue truthful to who the character is, the way you understand the character? I think those are some challenging questions we can ask our older readers as they explore dialogue in the books they're reading. All right, it's time for final thoughts.
Well, I have a final thought just on what you said. I was just thinking about that, and I've been having like weekly you know, Google Hangouts with my classroom. And so we most recently just played like bingo, which was really fun because it was a way for it to be like interactive. And so I was just thinking about like, if there is a common novel that that's being read aloud to these students, it might be really fun to just like remove the dialogue tag. And then it might just be a dialogue game. Like you pull out a piece of dialogue and try to guess like which character is saying that. And then that leads to a great conversation about like, well, who would say that? And why would they say that? You know, like, no, that sounds more like this one. And so I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, that's something fun. Maybe I could try.
Excellent.
I really hope that if teachers are trying to teach creative writing and they're trying to figure out ways of coming up with dialogue lessons, reach out. You know, I think that a lot of authors like to interact with teachers and interact with students, and so use us.
Cool. Ariel.
Yeah, definitely. I think that authors, you know, we're working from home on our stories, but I think, you know, school visits was always kind of like this icing on the cake for us, where we got to go and interact with readers and get that feedback. So for me, and I think a lot of children's book authors were missing that. And it would be fun to still do it on Zoom and to be able to talk with kids about writing and what they enjoy and be able to answer their questions. Yeah, I would definitely say Erica's absolutely right to reach out to authors. I think they would be very receptive to talking to students.
Excellent.
I have one last final thought.
Final.
Yes, I think also I would encourage teachers and parents to make sure that they're also reading a lot of like modern picture books, middle grade chapter books, young adult or allowing their children to read those, because I think that a lot of times with teaching, some of us who have been teaching for a while, like some of the books we grew up on that are our favorites, are a little outdated. And so what is contemporary for the students right now and what they're gravitating towards, they're seeing examples of dialogue that look very different than they did in Charlotte's Web. And I think that being in tune with that, and then also using some of these more contemporary ones as mentor texts as well, would also be really helpful, because it would kind of reach the students where they are too and keep them engaged.
Excellent. Well, I want to say thank you to our lovely authors, Erica, Ariel, and Katrina. We're so glad you could join us today. We will be posting notes in a Google Doc that will be on the nErDCamp website as well. And our authors, if they have anything extra they want to add after the fact, will be adding to that document with any slides or PowerPoints or anything that they want to add. And thank you for joining us, and stay nerdy, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks.